So welcome back to Managerial Accounting. Purpose of this first of two mini lectures to reviewing exam number one is to review the multiple choice part of the exam. So you may recall there were 30 multiple choice questions worth 2 points. So you could have got 60 points on this one. And then there were 4 problems. Each problem was worth 10 points. I'll do a separate little video on the review of the problems. So when you look at the grading of your exam, you have on that the number of questions correct, divided by 30, which is the percentage you got correct, multiplied by 60%. So if you got all 30 questions correct, you would have got 60 points. If you got less than 60 points, that means you got some wrong. And then I'll add to that each of the points that you got for the 4 problems. Right? And we'll also go over this in class if there are any questions about the grading. And if in fact I gave you too many points, come let me know and we can talk about an adjustment. All right, let's go through each of the 30, and some of you know that there actually were only 29 questions. I didn't actually have 30, but I gave you all the correct answer to the question. You all got question 29 right in your minds, so you got an extra credit there. All right, here goes. So what I've done in each of these questions is I've highlighted what the correct answer is, and if they involve computations, I've actually shown you the computations. So the first question, the primary goal of managerial accounting is to provide information to managers to make decisions. So the best answer there is C. Now, anytime you have multiple choice, you have to select what the best answer is. Number 2, which of the following would likely be considered indirect material by a manufacturer? So indirect material are those materials that are difficult to trace to the actual product. So if we're talking about indirect material by a manufacturer, steel, fabric, and lumber ought to be pretty easy to trace. Glue, which is a small little but important part, would be more difficult to chase. So glue would probably be indirect material. And you know, indirect materials end up in overhead. So the answer there is C. Number 3, the cost of goods manufactured. Now you saw this in the problem. To get cost of goods manufactured, you got to take beginning work in process, and you've got to add to that total manufacturing cost. Then you got to subtract out the ending inventory. So although the order is a little bit different in the choices here, they gave you, if you look at D, total manufacturing cost plus beginning work in process. Normally we put beginning work in process plus total manufacturing cost. Then you subtract out the ending work in process, and that would give you not the cost of goods sold. Some of you got hung up on this. It's cost of goods manufactured that we're looking for. So the best answer there is D. Number 4, which of the following is a period cost? Period costs are those costs that do not become part of the product itself. So clearly tire for bicycles, factory supervisory salary, that's overhead at the factory. Electricity cost to run the factory, that would also be overhead. So accounting salaries would not become part of the cost of the product for the manufacturer. Those would be what we call a period cost. Speaking of period costs, an example of period costs of all the ones given there, indirect materials, that's overhead, depreciation, that's overhead, property taxes on plant facility, that's overhead. That becomes part of the cost of the product. The one that doesn't become part of the cost of the product or period cost would be A, advertising expense. Number 6, viewed conversion cost. Conversion cost is the total of direct labor and factory overhead. So direct labor here was given at 196,300, and factory overhead is 187,900. If you add them together, you get 384,200. Anytime there is a number, do the calculation first and then have confidence in your answer, and then go look at your answer amongst the available choices. So the correct answer there is D. 7, which of the following would be an indirect cost for Bartell? Now, indirect costs are a cost that becomes part of the cost of the product, but is part of overhead. So it would be other than material and labor, but it's necessary to the manufacture of the product and becomes part of the cost of the product. So the one that is all the wages and wood and steel and leather used in making seat cushions for a manufacturer of bar stools, those are all direct materials or direct labor. Factory supervisor's salary would be an example of indirect costs or overhead. So the answer there is B. Number 8, prime cost. Prime cost by definition is prime materials, direct materials plus labor. That's prime costs, which are different than conversion costs, which we know are labor and overhead. So prime costs are materials and labor, so the answer there is B. Journalizing the entry for indirect labor costs incurred for general factory use would include anytime you incur indirect costs, you're going to debit the account factory overhead. So remember, factory overhead is debited when you incur factory overhead. and it is credited when you apply factory overhead to jobs. So the answer there is A. Number 10, which of the following is typically used by companies that make custom products? If you make custom products, you use job order costing, which is contrast to process costing. Hybrid costing, we just mentioned it as an example that combines both, but we didn't really get into any depth. So the one that, and I don't know what the hell operations costing is, doesn't mean anything to me. So the one that is typically used for making custom products would be job order costing. Number 10, journalizing the entries for jobs shipped to customers billed would include a credit to. So when you actually ship out merchandise, you're going to debit cost of goods sold, and you're going to credit finished goods. So think of what the journal entry would be, and then go looking for it. And they say journalizing the entries would include a credit to. The answer there would be C, finished goods. Number 12, a manufacturer of the following products which of the following would most likely use job order costing? So cell phone, highlighting pen, recliner, those are all units made in large quantities. One is the same as the other, but a graduation invitation, when you graduate and when you finish your associate's degree and they send out invitations to everybody, it's going to be customized to you. So graduation invitation would be the one that would most likely use job order costing. 13, in job order costing, the journal entry for the flow of direct materials into production. So when it's job order costing, when you put material into production, as you saw in one of the questions on the take-home part, it's a debit to work in process and a credit to materials. So debit, work in process, credit to materials. That is, again, think of what the journal entry is and then go looking for it, and there it is in A. 14, the salary of the director of internal audit would be classified as. So it's either a product cost or a period cost. And we know it's a period cost because it doesn't become part of the cost of the product. And the cost of the auditor would not be a selling expense. That would be an administrative expense. So the answer is D. It is a period cost administrative expense. Number 15, the document authorizing the issuance of materials. We call that a materials requisition form. That's the source document that justifies transferring stuff out of materials into work in process. So the answer there is A. 16, the amount of factory overhead costs incurred. So here you got to think of a little T account. So you debit the T account factory overhead for the costs that are incurred, and you credit factory overhead for the costs that are overhead costs applied to job. And if you say the factory overhead cost incurred exceeds the amount applied, that means you have underapplied overhead. And if you're going to have underapplied overhead, it says the amount of factory overhead incurred, factory overhead account, will have a debit balance because the debits, which are set up little T account on the left-hand side, put costs incurred, on the credit side put costs of overhead applied. So if you've got more incurred than applied, you're going to have a debit balance. So the answer there is A. Okay, here's the first of many computational ones. The following production data were taken from the records of the finishing department for June. And the question is the number of conversion equivalent units in the June 30th finished department inventory. So they're just focusing on the finished inventory, and the finished inventory is 7,000 units, which are 60% complete with respect to conversion costs. So 7,000 times 60% gives me 4,200. So again, do the calculation first, then go find the answer. All right, Department W had 2,400 units, 1/3 completed at the beginning of June, and 16,000 units were transferred to Department X from Department W during the period. 18,000 units were 1/2 complete at the end of the period. Assume the completion ratios apply to direct materials and conversion costs. And they want the equivalent units of production used to compute conversion costs. Okay, so conversion costs. So you had 24 units that were 1/3 complete at the beginning of the period. So 2/3 of the costs would have been incurred this period. So 2,400 times 2/3. Started and completed, you had 16,000 units that were transferred out of the department, and you had 2,400 to begin with. So the ones that were started and completed would be 16,000 minus 2,400. And then the conversion units in the ending inventory, 1,800 units were 1/2 complete, so 1,800 times 1/2. So 2,400 times 2/3. 16,000 minus 2,400, and now 1,800 times 1/2. Okay, you add those all together, you got 16,100 for conversion units, and that's the answer is A. You can pause this at any time if you want to sit and reflect a little bit on this. Number 19, the manufacture of 10,000 units of product, direct materials incurred was 165, direct labor costs incurred was 105, and applied factory overhead was 33. Conversion cost is the total of the labor plus the overhead. So the labor is 105, the overhead is 53, so that gives you 158, which is B. In process costing, the amount of work in process inventory is valued by allocating departmental cost between completed and partially completed units. So the answer there is B. Other ones are just not correct. So we're focusing it here on process. The amount of work in process inventory is valued by allocating department costs between completed and partially completed. So the answer there is B. 21. So they give us a bunch of information. The total number of units to be assigned costs, the total number of units. They didn't ask about equivalent units. They said total number of units. So the total number of units would be the 2,400 plus the started and completed, which is 16,000 minus the 2,400, which was the beginning inventory, plus the ending inventory of 1,800. This is the units to be assigned, not the equivalent units. So the answer there is D, 17,000. 22, which of the following businesses would most likely use job order costing? So job order costing is when you're tracing the cost of individual jobs. So a movie studio would most likely transfer and keep careful record of all the costs on each movie, as opposed to a manufacturer of paper or flour or gasoline, where you don't have customized products. So the answer there is A. Process costing would be most appropriate for, again, all the B, C, and D are all classic cases of job order costing. A gas refinery, one natural gas refinery, one would have you measure natural gas cubic feet or cubic yards or whatever. One is the same as the other, so they would use process costing. 24, which of the following is uncharacteristic of process costing? Well, process costing, you have several work in process accounts. You have manufacturing costs grouped by department. That's true. Perpetual inventory is maintained for materials, work in process, and finished goods. That's probably true. So which of the following, that would be, perpetual inventory would be used in terms of more likely to be used for job order costing. So which of the following is uncharacteristic of process costing? Cost accumulated by job. You just don't do that in process costing. You're going to have several accounts. You're going to have manufacturing costs grouped by department, and you're likely to have a materials maintained, perpetual inventory system maintained for materials, work in process, and finished goods. So the one that is uncharacteristic is C, costs accumulated by job. They're just not accumulated by job. That would be if you had a job order costing. 25, so a whole bunch of information here. Challenger produces 2 products. So we got regular widgets and Lux widgets, and the factory overhead, it's 675 divided by 300,000 direct labor hours. So the overhead rate per hour is $2.25. And they tell us that the actual production of widgets is 58,000. Of deluxe widgets, it's 58,000. And they also told us that a deluxe widget takes 3 hours of direct labor. So 58,000 times 225. So 225 is the overhead rate. 58,000 is the number of hours, and it takes 3 hours to make one of these units. So your answer there is 391,500. So the answer is A. 26, we have budgeted factory overhead of 13,500,000 and budgeted direct labor hours of 100,000, or 10 million rather. So 13,500 divided by 10 million gives me 1.35. And it says the actual direct labor hours for the month was 350, and overhead allocated for May is, well, if it's the rate per hour is 135, and the direct labor hours were 350, then it's 135 times 350 gives us 47,250. So the answer there is C. 27, which of the following are actual factory overhead allocation methods? So the classic methods are plant-wide, multiple department production department rates, and activity-based. So the answer there is A. 28, which of the following is a reason for banks to use activity-based costing? Do they use them to determine the amounts to charge to customers? Perhaps. Determine service quality? Perhaps. To determine profitability of services? Perhaps. How about D? To determine the amounts to be charged and the profitability of services provided? Sounds like the best answer, so the answer there is D. Again, you have to always, in multiple choice, always pick the best answer. 29, you all got right. And number 30, if selling and administrative expenses are allocated to different products for decision-making, they should be reported on the financial statements as well. The fact that we may have allocated selling administrative to the product for decision-making is fine, but when it comes to the financial statements, any period cost does not become part of the cost of the product, so it remains a period cost. So we may lump it with the other costs to get analyze the profits of a particular product, but that's just an allocation for decision-making purpose. On the financial statements, the general purpose financial statements, selling and administrative are a classic example of a C period cost. Okay, so I hope you found that quick review useful. I'll do a separate video on the problems, and we'll also talk about this in class. Okay? So I shall see you shortly. Adios, au revoir, hasta luego. Very shortly.